Welcome to TOOP TV's newest segment, Fireside Chat. The original Fireside Chat was a regular radio show used by presidents to inform the public of the latest issues. It originated in 1933 and ran until 1944. But now the Fireside Chat is back and we're using it to tell you about the latest real estate issues. It's uninterrupted interviews with the experts in the know. So sit back, relax and enjoy Fireside Chat.
Well, welcome to Fireside Chat, and today we're continuing our interview with Isobel Redmond, who of course is the leader of the opposition here in South Australia, and fun times those guys are all having at the moment. The Pollies are having a ball. Anyway, thanks for joining us, Isobel.
Always a pleasure, Anthony.
Now you're looking stunning, so you must be prosperous in politics nowadays?
No, but you have to be conscious in politics that wherever you go, whatever time of day, people are watching what you're wearing.
Now the first thing I want to ask is a very in-depth question. Have we got the real Isobel here today?
You always get the real Isobel, and sometimes my staff worry about that. I'm not capable of having a different persona, so if
Now can I indulge a little bit, and I kind of having a play really, but what sort of friggin' mess is the federal government in at the moment?
Well, they're in a big mess, because, well, for a number of reasons too. I mean, basically I think Julia Gillard has a major problem simply because you can't say, I'm not going to have a carbon tax under my government, and a few days later decide you're going to have a carbon tax. And I think that's a problem, but equally I think it's a problem trying to sell a tax that's not really saleable. And
do you think the whole way that the Rudd sort of, the takeover happened and then followed up by an absolute complete 180 degree on the carbon tax, the credibility is probably gone?
Yeah, that's the impression I get. I mean, I'm only an observer like everyone else. I don't have direct contact with the players at that level, but certainly the impression one is left with is that you know, once your credibility's gone, you might as well just step out of the way.
Well, we'll watch with interest with that, because you and I are just observers, but you're a bit closer to the action than me. So now, before we get into specific real estate questions, which is where I want to end up, just a generic question about the economy and your comments. And firstly, if we start with the global uncertainty, seems to be pretty tricky at the moment.
It is. I mean, there are huge concerns, obviously, with Greece and with Ireland, and then other countries potentially along the way, like Spain and Italy. You know, if Italy goes, then you'd wonder about the future of the EU. And you know, whether there's, I think they used the expression during the week, too big to bail, too big to fail. Yeah. So, you know, it's really a dilemma in Europe, and if that goes, I think there are problems. And then, of course, you've got the Chinese who have insisted on staying tied to the US dollar instead of floating their yuan. Yep. And so you've got the problems, I think, globally are quite difficult. And we've, in a large degree, we've been quite protected because we've got a good banking system with the 4 big banks and with regulation of the banks. And we never had the exposure in the mortgage market, for instance, that the Americans had. But that said, if the rest of the world goes, there's no way that we're capable of staying afloat.
So on a national level, so we've done international, national, the feeling I get, and really after a comment on it, the feeling I'm getting, and I'm now, after having a bit of a break, I'm now really in the trenches. I'm out there this morning, I'm talking to people in the real world. There's an amazing amount of pain out there. It's a completely different picture to the one that's being painted by the Reserve Bank. What are you hearing in your circles about what is actually happening out there in cuckoo land, as opposed to, you know, the official line?
Well, just on the national scene, I think there is real concern, and right across the country there are people who aren't going to add on extra staff. I've been talking to people in my old profession of the law, for instance, in Adelaide, and you know, they are having to let go staff.
I've heard the same. Yeah.
You know, it is really not very good, and I think that the problem for Julia Gillard at the moment with the carbon tax is that the reality is that there's no point in Australia being out ahead of the rest of the world. Everyone wants us to pollute less. Everyone wants us to move to clean energy. But when you talk, for instance, I went up to Port Pirie and spoke with Nearstar. Now they run the biggest single lead smelter in the world, and they need carbon. They can't just have green energy instead. They need carbon as part of the chemical process to create lead. They use world's best practice, and they said if it's actually done here, it uses that creates half the CO2 as if it's done in, for instance, China. So if you end up closing down near Star here and producing your lead overseas, what you end up is make more pollution. And so, there's a problem from that point of view. But, quite apart from the carbon tax questions, there's a real reluctance. And I heard an explanation yesterday about how we now have people saving for the first time in a long time. For a long time, Australians didn't seem to have any savings. We lived on credit card.
Yeah.
But they were talking about the paradox, and I forget what name it has, but there's a paradox in economics that, in fact, if people start saving, you end up with less money because there's less money circulating and therefore less people being employed and wages go down and so on and so on, and you end up with actually less money than what you would have had if you weren't saving, which is a strange dilemma.
Yeah. As just an average everyday person that just lives, and I may be completely ill-informed, but just logic would have it that to take on something so big in such a rush, I would agree with getting it ready to go, getting it all set, put it in holding until the economy can handle that sort of reverberation. It just seems completely insane to me. But
well, and I think that's the problem. I think if I were Julia Gillard, what I'd have done was, if I'd made the statement, I'm not going to have a carbon tax under my government, I'd have said, well, that's got to be the case. There will be no carbon tax. But I want to have a conversation with the Australian people so that I can explain why I think it would be a good idea. And when we go to the next election,
get the nod on it.
Yeah.
Yeah, completely agree. Okay, state.
State.
Go for it.
Well, in the state, I'm really very significantly worried about the debt level. Many people under the age of 35, for instance, won't remember that this state almost went bankrupt over the state bank.
I remember. So
yeah.
I'm much more than 35.
The government has now got us already back to a forecast. Well, before the budget was brought down, they were forecasting a debt of $7.5 billion, and that would be creating an interest payment of nearly $2 million a day. Now they are going to push that out further to $8.2 billion. And when you add to that the unfunded superannuation liability, the unfunded work cover liability, and all of the other things that impact, like we are now the highest taxing state in Australia. The consequence of that...
On a very small economy.
That's right, and the consequence is that we have more businesses leaving this state than are leaving other states proportionately. So if you look at all the states that are moving, all the businesses that are moving from state to state, we have less than 8% of the population, but 22% of the businesses that are moving to another state are coming out of South Australia.
Now, what about the saviour that we've been hearing about and waiting for, and hopefully it's about to happen, it's imminent, is the massive mining boom, which means we're all going to have a picnic and celebrate. Is that, in your view, going to happen?
Look, I hope it will happen, but can I just explain a couple of things? To give you some perspective, because, Mike Rann has been spruiking this mining boom for 9 years now, and we have had a mining exploration boom, but because of the global financial crisis, even that has gone backwards. Last year in this state, we got just under $200 million in royalties. In the West, where they really already have a mining boom, in the coming year, they're expecting to make 4,800, just shy of $4,800 million in royalties. And it's not just the royalties, you see, it's the question is that the royalties come into the state directly, but yeah, it's the employment, it's the people then spending money in the economy. And one of the things that we have been talking to people like BHP about is the need to employ people in South Australia rather than fly in, fly out.
Right, okay.
Because we don't get the benefit of it really, except if we get the employment here.
So now we've kind of got a macro picture. Now let's drill down into real estate. This is a real estate show.
Yep.
Right, but you can drop any bombshell you like on the show. Very safe, Isobel.
Oh, obviously.
All right, so we want some bombshells, right?